Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Taiji game development log update video. It's been 2 weeks, so it's time to check in on the game. I'm Matthew Van Dievender, and the game is called Taiji. It's an open world adventure puzzle solving type game that takes a lot of inspiration from The Witness, so if that type of thing sounds interesting to you, there's a link in the description to find out more. So, unfortunately, no concept art for the mill this week, although I have started kind of revising that area from a puzzle design standpoint, and once I'm happy with that, it should be fairly straightforward to do the artwork, or at least is more straightforward. You know, I kind of couldn't do all of that in one go because I realized that there was a lot that I wanted to do design-wise to change the area, and if I try to do that at the same time that I'm trying to figure out what it looks like, it's not really going to work. I kind of have to know what the design is, and then we can try to either make some art and fit the design into that, or make some art that fits the design, or however you want to do that. So what are some of the other things that I did these past 2 weeks? So I wanted to do for a while some design revisions to the gallery area. So there's kind of two things that I did there. One is that I revised the flow of the puzzles on the second floor. Used to, it was the case that it was kind of entirely linear within one set of puzzles there. And I decided instead to kind of take the tutorial puzzle for that and move it out in the hallway. And then there's doors, once you solve that open to the back side of that room there. And then you can do the other puzzles in more or less a non-linear order. There's a little bit of linearity in there, but partly I wanted to do this because it felt like the feedback from a lot of playtesters was that the difficulty ramp was kind of weird for those puzzles in that sequence. It didn't really feel like a sequence, and they felt like the hard part was in the middle, and then it was easy at the end, and they kind of just felt like it would be better that way. And I kind of agreed, so made that change. The other change was there was a particularly difficult puzzle in the gallery, which I decided to move outside of the gallery and put in kind of, I don't know, the area outside the lobby, I guess. And the reason for that is that I wanted to make that puzzle optional instead of being required. And with the way that I kind of structured the gallery, it was pretty difficult to imply that this puzzle is optional without just removing it from that area. But I still wanted the context of it being part of the gallery area's puzzles. So I think that worked out okay. One of the other things that I did, which was not design related, was I made kind of a line or edge sound emitter type, I guess, which is essentially I can define a line and the sound will emit from the closest point to the player along that line. This seems kind of odd, but it's really useful for things like wind sounds or water sounds, or something that you kind of want to come from a defined area rather than a single point. Because otherwise the way I would have to do it before is I'd have a bunch of different wind sound emitters, and so you'd kind of have weirdness as you moved between those different emitters, and you'd also have to make sure that you didn't have weird phase problems between the sounds. And anyway, a whole bunch of headaches go away if I just switch over to this. So I switched over a lot of sounds to using that, and it's something, again, I wanted to do for a while, but I thought it would be difficult to do. But the actual solution to that ended up being one line of code, so you're kind of left with that feeling of, why didn't I do this earlier? Because this makes things way easier, and it's really straightforward to implement that. So something amazing happened this week, which is that I learned something from Twitter. I know it's hard to believe, but there was actually a tweet by Jaap van Muiden, which I know that's not how you say that name, but they were responding to a thread about kind of easing functions on animations, and they suggested that there might be some issues with using sine wave functions in shaders in order to do plants blowing in the wind if you just do something simple like sine of the time elapsed times whatever the wind speed is. And I think I sort of misunderstood what they were talking about, and I thought that the problem happened with a fixed wind speed there, and I think more of the issue has to do with when you vary that wind speed over time. But it still encouraged me to go down a rabbit hole of kind of investigating whether or not the shaders in my game worked if the game had been running for a long time. Since I didn't want to run the game for like 24 hours straight because I didn't really have time to do that, I did kind of the next best thing, which was just to take the time variable that I had and like add 100,000 to it to see if stuff broke, which of course it did, or else I wouldn't be talking to you about this right now. So the reason that it broke actually didn't really have anything to do with like integration errors, which was kind of what the original discussion topic was about, and more had to do with accuracy errors. And this is a little complicated, but I'll try to boil it down as simply as possible. You know, anytime you want to represent a number on a computer, you have to do that with some kind of finite amount of bits. You can use as many as you want, and simply enough, the more bits you use, the more accurately you can represent a number. So in the case of something like time, if you're storing that time as like seconds with some kind of decimal value for sub-second accuracy, the bigger that number gets, the less decimal places you have for sub-second accuracy. And in the case of what I was doing, you start to run out of like millisecond level accuracy after about 4 hours, which is not really good for a game, needless to say, that I would expect players to maybe play for sessions of 4 hours. But even if that's not that common, if I do decide to put the game on a console, then consoles have like suspend and resume features, and so somebody can play, you know, a 20-hour session, you know, amortized into little chunks over multiple days or whatever, and I would still have the same problem. So there's several different ways that you could fix this problem, but the easiest one is to just use more bits for the time. So rather than use 32 bits, which was kind of the standard thing that Unity gave me, I instead just switched that over to a 64-bit number. The reason you're using twice as much is because you kind of, that's your choice. It's sort of an either or for those. And twice as much is kind of like overkill. So even though we're kicking the can down the road here and not really like solving the problem, we're definitely kicking the can exponentially further down the road than 4 hours. And so it shouldn't be a problem that any player would realistically run to in any kind of normal session. What was that? Weird. Now, you run into a bit of a problem with shaders, which is kind of where I originally was thinking about this, in that shaders, most of the time you're forced to use 32-bit values for things, so I can't just add more bits to make the time more accurate. So instead there, I kind of got a tip, and this is what I learned from Twitter, from Ignacio Castaño via Jonathan Blow. I got a tip to use sort of a wrapped timer system. So you'll just have a timer that essentially loops every 1,000 seconds. It goes back to 0 and goes back to 1,000. And then as long as you take whatever your value is to your sine wave or just anything in your shader, if it wraps at 1,000 seconds, then you can just reset that timer and everything will be seamless. So that's what I chose to do. And interestingly enough, if what you're feeding into your sine function is your wrapped timer value times 2 times pi times some decimal value that's only got 3 decimals, then you're guaranteed always whatever those 3 decimal values are to wrap at 1,000. Anyway, that about does it. So thanks for joining, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and wishlist the game on the Steam. Wishlist the game on the Steam. And I hope I'll see you all in 2 weeks. And I also hope that we'll have some concept art show then, and something more interesting and some kind of accelerated progress. It's been kind of slow going recently, but sometimes it goes like that. But anyway, as I said earlier, thanks for joining, and I will see you all around next time. Bye-bye.